rise. Oh yay, oh yay, oh yay. All persons having aught to do before the honorable judges of the Court of Common Pleas in Lycoming County, hold this day, give attention and they shall be heard. God save the Commonwealth and the honorable court. This honorable court is now in session. Please be seated.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this special session of court. We're here for our Law Day celebration, which is one of the nice things that we get to do as judges. We are missing a few judges. We are a panel of 5 normally. Judge Lavecchio sends his regards. His oldest son, who is in medical school, surprised him and his wife today and just showed up. And so he is spending some time with his son. And Judge Gray is actually stuck in court, so he may sneak in at some point during the ceremonies today. Magistrate Fry, are you ready to proceed? Okay.
Okay, well, good afternoon. My name is Christian Fry. I am the chairman of the Law Day Committee. I want to welcome you all to our annual celebration of Law Day. This year, as always, we had a number of excellent submissions, which made our job very difficult. But we do have the winners here today to not only show you their end product, but we're also going to bring them up here to have them explain to you a little bit about their respective submissions. This year's theme is Separation of Powers, a Framework for Freedom. And again, I think you'll be impressed at the interpretations that we received from our students this year. So before we start, if you'd all rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First, we have a proclamation to be presented by the Lycoming County Commissioners, and we have 2 of them here today, Tony Massar and Jack McKernan. If you'll come on up.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you for inviting the commissioners. I want to say thank you to the parents that are so involved with their children. We've been fortunate, or I've been fortunate, to come to a couple of Law Days, and this is, I don't think I've seen this many art pieces here that for Law Days in the time that we have been coming. So. It's great that the parents are involved and creating these young scholars that are learning about law and the judicial process. On behalf of the commissioners of Lycoming County, I'm Jack McKernan, and Tony Massara is here. Rick Marabito sends his best wishes. He got tied up in something at home and he couldn't make it this afternoon. But I do want to read this proclamation. Whereas Law Day was first held in 1958, was established in the United States to exemplify the merits of our court system, and whereas Law Day affords citizens the opportunity to reflect on our country's judicial system, a system that provides a forum for the peaceable resolution of disputes among citizens, permits citizens to obtain indemnification of their grievances, even grievances against the government itself, and provides extensive protection of the defendant to protect against the possibility of unjust imprisonment by an overzealous government, a system which seems preferable to an unchecked government which cannot be held to account. And whereas Law Day is observed in our community with activities which include honoring Law Day essay and art winners, presentation by local government officials and judicial representatives, and celebrations of our court system. Now therefore, the Board of Commissioners of the County of Lycoming proclaim Friday, May 4th, 2018 as Law Day in the County of Lycoming and encourage citizens to recognize the advantages of our judicial system and to support all those who intricately involved in our court system and who strive toward justice for all. In witness thereof, we have set our hand and seal May 4th, 2018, the County of Lycoming. R. Jack McKernan, Chairman, Tony R. Macera, Vice Chairman, Richard Marabito, Secretary. Christian.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will be very brief. How many people, I see a contestant that's been here before. Maybe there's several. How many people have been to this event? Raise your hands. Okay, so for the rest of you, you are going to be very impressed by what you hear from some of these children and some of these young adults. So sit back and enjoy the show.
Thank you very much. All right, before we get started, I'd like to just thank the members of the Law Day Committee. We meet a couple of times, not only to talk about our theme, but also then to judge the entries, and it becomes a relatively time-intensive process. So I just want to acknowledge those individuals that have donated their time to that end. Judge McCoy, attorneys Dave Wilk, John Petrovito, Don Martino, Tammy Taylor, Jennifer Lynn, Susan Ronick, Taylor Mulholland, and Jennifer Heverly, paralegals Jerry Rook, Jen West, Rebecca Hovenstein, Stephanie Tempesco, Christine True, and Pam Tosecki. Our facility dog, Jedi, was present for a good portion of that as well. And of course, I'd like to thank Michelle Fry, the Executive Director of the Law Association, who does the lion's share of the work to get this ready for today. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to the Law Association President, Jennifer Heverly, for the portrait unveiling.
So the Law Association is really happy to be continuing a tradition of providing and arranging for a judicial portrait. And for those of you who don't know, we have a judge who took the bench in January of this year, Judge Linhart. And I'm going to ask him if he'd be willing to come forward for this. Before you do, I also want you to know Judge Linhart has been practicing in this community for almost 30 years. I'm going to round up. And he was our DA for 10 years before taking the bench, and we hope that he's going to be with us on the bench for a very long time. So, Judge Linhart. And for the unveiling, I also want to call forward Whitney Hart, who is a wife of an attorney here in town, Brandon Schmary, who's a Law Association member, and she was the photographer for the portrait. So, Judge, I'm going to give you the honors of unveiling yourself.
Thank you very much.
I just quickly wanted to just say a few things. I remember when I went in to sit for the portrait, one of the first questions I was asked was, which is your best side? And I laughed and I said, I don't have a good side anymore. But you did a very nice job with what you had to work with, and I appreciate that very much.
All right, well, thank you. And I think we can all agree that it's a fair resemblance to the real thing. So. Well, without further ado then, let's get into our actual awards here. So I'd like to start with the essay winners. And if we could bring up Lindsay Garber. Lindsay is a 4th grader from Leiter Elementary School, and this is actually her 2nd time winning Law Day. So have you read this. I'll hold it. Let's step out in front here. I'll hold this for you, and you can read, okay?
The importance of checks and balances. In the United States, there are 3 branches of government. They are the legislative, judicial, and executive branches. Each branch has a certain job, and the other branches have special powers to watch over it. These are called checks and balances, and they make the branches equal so that one doesn't become too powerful. Some countries don't have this, so the president can do whatever they want and make laws, even if they are not good laws. That's why checks and balances are important. I'll tell you about the 3 branches of our government and how checks and balances work. The legislative branch makes laws, but they can't just make any old law, because the other 2 branches have checks and balances. The president, who is in the executive branch, can veto those laws if he thinks they are not good laws. The judicial branch can call a law unconstitutional. The judicial branch interprets the laws and decides if people are following them, but the other 2 branches have some powers over the judicial branch. The president nominates judges. The legislative branch has to approve the judges. They can also impeach the judges if they are not treating everyone fairly. The president can declare executive orders, which are laws he made himself, but the judicial branch can declare them unconstitutional if they are not fair. The president can veto a law, but the legislative branch can override the veto, which means it will still become a law. The legislative branch can also impeach the president and remove him from office. I think we are very lucky to have checks and balances. That way all of the parts of our government are equal. I am very happy that the Constitution set our government up this way.
Certificate and a check for it. Congratulations. All right, next up we have Luke O'Brien, 7th grader from Loyalsock Township Middle School. I think you're tall enough, we'll let you do it yourself here.
Humans, especially ones with large amounts of power, have always overstepped their boundaries. That is not something that we as species can change. There are, however, things we can do to limit powerful people from overstepping their bounds. One good idea on how to do this was originally developed by the Roman Republic. This is known to us now as the separation of powers, the idea that there are multiple branches of the government and they can each limit each other's power. Here in the U.S., we have the judiciary, executive, and legislative branches. Between these 3, there have been many instances of one taking advantage of their power and the others keeping that one in balance. One somewhat topical example would be the Iran-Contra affair under the Reagan administration. First, however, some context is necessary. Under the Reagan administration, there was a very strict policy on communism, especially in the Western Hemisphere. This meant that the Cuban-backed Sandinista regime in Nicaragua was a force to be destroyed. The Contras were an anti-communist paramilitary force who Reagan called a moral equivalent to our founding fathers. The general populace and legislative branch of the U.S. did not agree to this and banned any U.S. funding to the group. Reagan did not want to back down this easy. He would tell his national security advisor, "I want you to do whatever you have to do to help those people keep body and soul together." This culminated in the selling of arms to Iran, against the rules of a previously enacted arms embargo against Iran. Of the $30 million the Iranians paid, only $12 million was found in the hands of the U.S. government. General Oliver North would explain this with the fact that the rest was used for the funding and training of Contras in Nicaragua. But what would be done to balance the power of the executive branch? The judicial branch would conduct hearings and prosecutions for higher-ups involved in the scandal and make sure something like it would never happen again. People like Caspar Weinberger, Secretary of Defense at the time, and Robert McFarlane, National Security Advisor at the time, would be indicted for their parts in the scandal. There would be much investigation into the ordeal, and the executive branch's suspiciously gained power would be dissolved. Even though many of the people indicted would be pardoned by President George H.W. Bush, the executive branch would never try to exceed the power given to them by Constitution in any such way again. The balance would then become restored between the branches of government, with the executive branch kept in check. If one section of the government were permitted to run free with no ability to be kept in check, it would likely give up on the idea of representing the populace, as it is supposed to in a federal republic. This section of government might see free speech as a threat to their power, and they would merely sign in to act a law oppressing the free speech of individuals. If power is heavily concentrated towards one branch, they may take advantage of their power by taking away one of the key rights of American citizens. With a separation of powers, a congressman might propose that law, and it might get voted in by fellow congressmen. But then it has to go through the judiciary branch, who decides whether or not the law is constitutional. For purpose of demonstration, let's say that by some miracle, the judiciary branch finds a law like that constitutional and does not veto it. It then has to go into the executive branch, where the president either vetoes the law or approves it. That's a three-layered fail-safe on making sure that no branch of government exceeds their power and infringes the rights of U.S. citizens. Though in theory an unconstitutional law could be passed, it would be extremely difficult, and in the time it would take for one to be passed, the citizens of the U.S. would likely be able to stop such a thing from happening. The idea of separation of powers is an ancient yet still useful one. The Roman Republic fell because they were unable to keep their power of the government branch in check. Maintaining a balance of power between the branches of government is paramount to the survival of a free people. If the power becomes concentrated in the hands of one branch, as it did in the Iran-Contra affair, it will mean that the government will doing unconstitutional things as they did in that instance, but on a more long-term scale. The Iran-Contra affair was able to be quelled rather quickly, making sure the executive branch did not overstep their bounds in more ways than they already did in that instance. If a branch of government becomes all-powerful in the long term, because we as the people neglect the separation of powers, future generations will read in textbooks of the fall of the United States Republic. Thank you.
All right. Next up is another repeat winner, Emma Strickland, also a 7th grader at Loyalsock Middle School.
This year, when the Law Day prompt about checks and balances was released, I was fortunate because we had already learned about separation of power in Mr. Cook's social studies class. We studied ancient societies such as Mayans, Greeks, and Egyptians. We also learned about ancient Rome, specifically their government. It was split into 3 branches: the Senate, the Assembly, and the Consul. They instituted this method so that one person or group wouldn't become too powerful. This same concept was used in the establishment of our government. In 1788, James Madison published the Federalist No. 51. It was titled, "The structure of the government must furnish the proper checks and balances between the different departments." The essay was about the idea of checks and balances and the importance of separation of powers. Madison played a leading role in convincing the majority of the framers to incorporate a separation of power into the Constitution. A year later, the Founding Fathers built a system of separation of power into the Constitution by dividing the government into 3 branches. Each branch has separate responsibilities to guarantee that the powers of the government are balanced. They can limit each other, avoiding the abuse of power. The 3 branches are the legislative, the judicial, and the executive. This is an example of the trias politica principle, which establishes the division of government into 3 individual branches. Each branch has a limited amount of power and can be checked by another branch. The legislative branch includes Congress, the Senate and House of Representatives. They make laws, confirm or reject presidential appointments, and they can also declare war. The judicial branch is made up of the Supreme Court and other federal courts. They decide and interpret the meaning of laws and how the laws are used. The executive branch is made up of the president, vice president, the cabinet, executive departments, independent agencies, and other boards, commissions, and committees. This branch has the responsibility to carry out and enforce laws. According to the website usconstitution.net, the separation of power devised by the framers of the Constitution was designed to do one primary thing: to prevent the majority from ruling with an iron fist. Madison and the framers knew that if we didn't have a system of checks and balances, then the citizens of our nation might not fully possess the rights guaranteed in the Constitution. However, even though we have separation of power, not everything is always balanced. For instance, Gonzalez versus O Centro Espírito Beneficito Unido do Vegetal is a case that illustrates when one branch overstepped its power and had to be checked by another. The Religious Freedom Restoration Act ensures that interest in religious freedom is protected. The legislature passed the law with a unanimous U.S. House vote and a nearly unanimous U.S. Senate vote with only 3 senators against. President Bill Clinton then signed the act into law in 1993. The O Centro Espírito Beneficito Unido do Vegetal, or the UDV, is a religious organization. They use Huasca tea in their religious practices. Huasca tea contains dimethyltritryptamine, which is a Schedule I narcotic. In 1999, a U.S. Customs agent ordered by U.S. Attorney General Alberto Gonzales seized over 30 gallons of the tea that was being shipped to the Santa Fe, New Mexico branch of the UDV from Brazil. The government seized the tea because it was a hallucinogenic drug that violates the Controlled Substances Act. No charges were filed, but the United States chapter of UDV claimed that the seizure was an illegal violation of the church's rights. The UDV believed the usage of the drug was permitted under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, so they sued the government. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decided unanimously that the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993 requires the government to permit the importation, distribution, and possession of and use of an otherwise illegal drug by a religious organization when the government failed to prove a compelling interest. This means the government could not demonstrate the drug had a high potential abuse or had potential health risks. In this instance, the executive branch exceeded their power by interpreting the law incorrectly. U.S. Customs seized the tea even though the UDV was permitted to have it due to the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. The UDV went to court and the justices agreed with them. The judicial branch kept the executive branch in check by interpreting the law that was made by the legislature. In this situation, checks and balances ensured that citizens of the United States could have the religious freedom guaranteed to them by the Bill of Rights and assured through the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. While researching this topic, I watched a video of U.S. Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia discussing separation of power and checks and balances before the Senate Judiciary Committee on October 5, 2011. He asked a question, "What is the reason that America is such a free country?" He thought most people would say freedom of speech or freedom of the press or unreasonable search and seizure, privileges contained in the Bill of Rights. But these civil liberties are what he called parchment guarantees, promises that are only written on paper. Scalia said what really sets us apart is our separation of power and system of checks and balances. These systems provide a safeguard so the 3 branches of the government have the ability to ensure that one person or group doesn't exceed their power and deny the people the rights guaranteed in our Constitution. Balance of power is the real foundation for our freedom.
And for our final essay, we have Gabriel Mineta, a 10th grader from Williamsport High School, who is also our overall essay winner.
Okay, so the title of this was Roosevelt's Grab for Power. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Franklin D. Roosevelt in his first inaugural address, March 4th, 1933. The Great Depression was still raging as President Roosevelt entered his second term in the White House, winning yet another landslide election in 1936. Millions of Americans were still without work, and the Dust Bowl left much of the Midwest vacant as dust storms destroyed crop and farmers flocked to California in search of a new beginning. Life certainly wasn't easy by any means, but with the re-election of FDR, it appeared as if there was still hope. To say that Franklin was loved by the American public is an understatement. In his first 100 days in office, his administration passed legislation that aimed to stabilize industrial and agricultural production, create jobs, and stimulate immediate recovery for Americans across the nation. All the while, FDR kept the public informed on progress via his fireside chats. But more importantly, he gave them a hope, which hadn't been there with the previous president. Much progress had been made as Roosevelt's first term came to a close. However, some will argue that much of his legislation did nothing but strip Americans of the one true thing that made them American, their ability to help themselves instead of relying on the federal government to come to their aid. In defense of Roosevelt, many will say he had no choice and did everything he could to aid the Americans across the nation in a time of great fear and desperation. All seemed well as Roosevelt entered his second term, unaware of the great troubles waiting down the road concerning his legislation. All throughout his first term, FDR clashed with the Supreme Court, and in particular, 4 of the more conservative-minded justices, nicknamed the Four Horsemen, who continually attempted to shoot down legislation vital to FDR's New Deal plan. Some examples would be the National Recovery Administration, NRA, and the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, AAA. Angered by his inability to push any significant legislation through, Roosevelt decided to take action. As he told the press, the court had created a no man's land where no government, state or federal, could function. With the help of his Attorney General, Homer Cummings, Roosevelt secretly devised a plan to reform the courts. On February 5, 1937, the plan was announced to the shock of Congress as well as much of the nation. Roosevelt used the justices' ages against them, stating that every justice above the age of 70 should be allowed to appoint a justice of his own choosing. This would move the current number of 9 justices to a maximum of 16. Not only did he request to appoint as many as 6 additional justices, but also 44 new judges to the lower federal courts. He justified this request by stating that the shortage of judges had resulted in many delays within Congress because they were overburdened. Roosevelt also stated, "A part of the problem of obtaining a sufficient number of judges to dispose of cases is the capacity of the judges themselves. This brings forward the question of aged or infirm judges, a subject of delicacy and yet one which requires frank discussion." Basically, his reasoning for the reformation of the courts was based on the justices' perceived inability to complete their jobs efficiently and in a timely manner. Roosevelt's message touched off the greatest struggle in our history among the 3 branches of government. After a 168-day battle, the court finally shot down FDR's court-packing request. Many in the Senate saw his request as a ruse to hide the real objective, which was indeed to pack the courts in his favor. FDR's scheme, said the Senate Judiciary Committee, was a measure which should be so emphatically rejected that its parallel will never again be presented to the free representatives of the free American people. In simpler words, the court made it quite obvious that Roosevelt's request was one which should never have been asked in the first place. Thankfully, due to the system of checks and balances between the legislative and executive branches of government, balance was again restored and a clear message was sent to future presidents concerning the courts. In the Federalist Papers number 51, James Madison's famous quote, "If all men were angels, no government would be necessary," comes back to prove a point, especially in this particular case. Politics are not always so cut and dry, and without the separation of powers, many politicians and government officials would indeed step outside the boundaries and abuse their power. Thankfully, the founders of the Constitution foresaw this issue and created a government in which it is extremely hard to abuse one's power and get away with it. In this example, we see an ambitious and somewhat sneaky Roosevelt attempt to exceed his executive power by packing the court in his favor. Thankfully, due to the checks the other two branches have upon the executive branch, this conflict was effectively tabled and discarded. Without this system, the rights of the United States citizens would be in danger of exploitation at the very hands of those officials sworn to protect them.
Okay, on to our art winners. Our first winner is Reagan Tucker, a 2nd grader from Leiter Elementary School. and it looks like Reagan also won last year. All right. Which one is yours? Right here, right? Make sure we don't knock the cake over. Do you want me to hold it and you can describe it, explain it? All right, go ahead. Let's do this. I want to make sure they hear you too. Only have so many hands. You can hold the microphone and explain your art.
That's the legislative tower, and that's the executive. That's the judicial, and each superhero tells something about each branch.
Okay. And what's the legislative saying here?
I make laws with the Congress.
Very good. What about the executive branch?
I sign the laws. I am in charge of our armed services.
And the judicial?
I decide if laws are fair, equal, and constitutional.
Very good. Is there anything else you want to tell us about your artwork? No. Okay. Well, congratulations. Well done. I'll take this. And there is your certificate and your prize. Yes. All right. Okay. Next up is Alice Rayvert, who again is a prior year's winner. And we have a different medium here this year. I'll let you introduce everything.
This year, I decided to make a music video, and me and my mom helped come up with the lyrics for it. And there's three different sections describing each branch.
Okay, Debbie, you want me to turn? It's working before, as I tested.
Checks and balances are working every hour to keep separation of powers. Checks and balances are working every hour to keep separation of powers. The legislative branch is making the laws, then it goes to the president to make the call. He can veto it because he's the commander-in-chief, but he better watch out because he could be impeached. Overriding vetoes and controlling the funds, checks and balances have just begun. Checks and balances are working every hour to keep separation of powers. Checks and balances are working every hour to keep separation of powers. The executive branch enforces the laws with the help of the armed forces here and abroad. The president is head of the state. He can veto a bill and make Congress wait. Oh, the president, he gets to choose all 9 judges to sort out the clues. Even though the president could veto a law, a 2/3 vote means that there is a flaw. Checks and balances are working every hour to keep separation of powers. Checks and balances are working every hour to keep separation of powers. The judicial branch interprets the laws. The Supreme Court deserves a lot of applause because if law or order doesn't follow the Constitution, it will not follow through and they'll face prosecution. These 9 judges get the president's approval because they serve until their death, retirement, or removal. Checks and balances are working every hour to keep separation of powers. Checks and balances are working every hour to keep separation of powers. So as you can see, no one can have too much power because then America will be so sour.
All right. Well, sorry for a few technical glitches there, but here is your certificate and your check.
Thank you.
Congratulations. All right, next we have Amani Tran and Hannah Hausman, 10th graders from Williamsport High School. We won't move there.
Yeah, that might be a little bit difficult.
Here it is.
Yeah, stand over here. Oh, yeah. Hello, I'm Amani Tran, and
I'm Hannah.
we made these 3 buildings to symbolize the 3 branches that the separation of powers creates. We have the White House over here, which symbolizes the executive branch. We have the Supreme Court building, which symbolizes the judicial branch. And then over here we have the Capitol building, which symbolizes the legislative branch.
When we were making our project, we made each building separately, and then at the end we connected them all together. And this is to show how each of the branches of government have their own separate powers, but they can come together using checks and balances to create an equal and balanced government that will work together and keep our country intact.
Amani, there is yours. Congratulations. And Hannah?
Thank you.
All right, congratulations. All right, that was actually one of my personal favorites, for what it's worth. All right, next up, Rose Washer, also 10th grader from Williamsport High School. Good.
I made this, which is supposed to be like a symbolization of a desk with the 3 branches of government. And I said, they're in a perpetual love-hate relationship. They rely on each other to exist, yet are in a constant battle for power. This project shows the desk on which the branches' letters to each other's lie, mocking and flirting. So I have some postcards between each branch, mocking and saying that they're in charge. We have some vetoes and the president being denied. Yep.
Very good. Congratulations. If you don't mind, we'll pass this up so the judges can take a look. I thought this was... All right, next up, Rosemary Flock and Samuel Mailer. Again, 10th graders from Williamsport.
Thank you very much. You want to start or you want me to start? All right. Well, this is called Checks and Imbalances.
Let's get it up front here.
I can hold it if you like.
Yeah? All right.
Thank you. Now, we have the 3 main branches of the government, the executive, legislative, and judicial. But as you can see, they are uneven. They're causing instability in American democracy. They're causing a deterioration of our government, and it can be seen as dangerous. We see pieces falling off the board. The executive branch is often seen as the most overblown, with more employees than necessary, wasteful, and other branches being stripped of their powers. It's a dangerous balance that they have that needs to be restored. Anything? No? All right. Well, thank you very much.
I'd just like to talk about where we got the inspiration for this project. One of my favorite movies, Brave, it's a Disney movie. They talk about how the 3 brothers were supposed to support the kingdom, and the way they illustrated that was they had a chessboard held up by 3 different chess pieces, but one brother overtook the other 2, and everything fell apart. So that's where we got the inspiration for it.
There you go. Congratulations. Rosemary, congratulations. Finally, we have our overall winners, Shauna Markle and Rihanna Gare, again, 10th graders from Williamsport High School. And I think this is the entry that this group is most excited about.
I gotta get my half-eaten Constitution. It went somewhere. It's probably in one of the boxes. No, that's the actual Constitution. Here's my favorite. Okay, so obviously we made cakes. It was a joke in Rinker's class that I was going to make something to bribe the judges, and it worked. So for the art competition, we decided that we thought that it was a very new idea, and it was able to express the art that is representative of our country. So the top blue tier is the executive branch. Where'd it go? Oh, there it is. Okay. With fondant, we made the big veto letters to show what is most widely known as the power of the president. It's to check Congress when a bill is trying to become law. On top of the cake, we put the Constitution because that is what started everything that we have. Without the Constitution being written, there would be no separation of powers and no us in general. We'd still be British, and that's kind of weird. So I think someone got excited whenever they got the cake for the first time because "We the People" is missing. So here's the half-eaten original Constitution. That's the revised Constitution, which really can't happen. It's a fun fact. Jefferson, we have 50 stars on top to show that the stars sometimes how the president can go out of line and push his boundaries without major consequences. Jefferson made the U.S. twice as big when he decided to go for the Louisiana Purchase. Technically, this was out of his power, and Congress was really angry with him. But there was no set punishment for this boundary. So when he doubled this with the Louisiana Purchase, it was very much illegal. It was not supposed to happen. But he did make us, that entire section of the United States was then created because of something that he did out of his power. So the inside of this cake is a lemon Madeira cake. If you don't know what a Madeira cake is, it's basically a pound cake, but it's a little more fancy, with lemon buttercream icing. And there is also blueberries. There's fresh fruit in between the two layers. It is a 3-layer cake because of federalism, and layer cake federalism is how this works. So the white cake that we made is the judiciary branch, where the Supreme Court is held. The star of this cake is the 3D fondant sculpture of the gavel. You can't actually use it. It'll break in half. You could try. You could try, but it would be a little sad. This, along with the court cases that are around the edge, show that when other branches try to propose bills, the Supreme Court can rule against it if deemed unconstitutional. There were other court cases on it, but we decided to make it a little more official. So you can't see it right now, but the two cases on here are Marbury v. Madison and McCulloch v. Maryland. So Marbury v. Madison is what gave the judicial branch the ability of judicial review. Without this, the courts don't have nearly as much power. In Article 3 of the Constitution, it was planned that there was a Supreme Court, but they didn't really do much for the first 5 to 10 years until Marbury v. Madison came around, and that's what changed everything. McCulloch v. Maryland is what started federal supremacy. It is the Supremacy Clause, and that's what really formed how our government is today. So that's fun facts about the top. Right there. Found it. Okay. When Obama tried to propose 23 executive actions on gun control in 2013, within 24 hours, they were in the Supreme Court, and 19 of those 23 got shut down. The sword and balance, they're over here. They were misplaced, but it's okay, because you guys aren't supposed to know that. They're right here, and these are both with Lady Justice. That is what's in front of the Supreme Court building. The sword and balance are both symbols from Lady Justice, the sword representing due process, and the balance showing that all evidence will be seen in the court of law unless the exclusionary rule is in play. In case you don't know what the exclusionary rule is,
It is when evidence is taken in illegally without a warrant or without suspicion. You can't use it in court. No matter whether it makes them guilty or not guilty, you just can't use it. Both of these were also made with fondant, and the seal of Supreme Court is on the back. It's on the side of the cake. It's on the side of the cake. The inside is a vanilla Madeira cake with set of chocolate surprise in the middle with vanilla buttercream. So we hollowed out the middle, and there are mini chocolate chips in the center. So if you guys decide that you want some cake and we pull out the first slice, there's going to be a little fountain of chocolate chips. It's exciting. I like it. The last cake was the legislative branch. We put a separation in the middle of the cake to show how Congress is broken between the two chambers, the Senate and the House of Representatives. We have both of their seals on top of the cake. It's on the side of the cake. To show the differences between the two chambers and their terms. So in the House of Representatives, there are 435 members because of the Great Compromise that happened. Basically, with that, the House of Representatives is based on population, while the Senate is every state gets 2 senators, hence there being 100, and there are 435. And the House of Representatives is deemed less important and special because there are 435 members, but there are only 100, and they have 6-year terms in the Senate. The quill on top with the ink shows that they're most known for doing what they are most known for doing, writing bills and trying to make them law. The bill process is extremely hard, and this is well noted due to how many bills actually become law versus over 10,000 bills being presented, most of them dying in committee. When the president commits an illegal act, it is their duty to call for impeachment and create a hearing for the case of impeachment as well. Congress does have the ability to override vetoes made by the president, but in order to do that, there must be a 2/3 vote in both the chambers of Congress, which does not happen very often at all. In the middle, it is a vanilla Madeira cake with vanilla buttercream, but in between the layer, it's 2 layers in this one because there's 2 chambers. It was planned. There are strawberries in the middle. So that goes with the red, white, and blue theme because this is America.
You can just lay it down.
Okay. Careful. I don't want to.
Congratulations to you both.
Thank you.
Well done.
Positive. But yeah, that's
I am told that the ladies have been so kind as to offer to cut it open here at our reception for the winners in the jurors' lounge when we're done. So you may want to make your way over for no other reason than to see what's inside.
Christian, I think we should point out that we made these ladies make these cakes twice.
That is a fair,
because the judges did get to eat the first round.
Yes. And so we've already had a little bit of a sneak peek. But with that, I'll turn it over to our judges to make any remarks that they'd like to make.
Okay, Judge Linhart, do you have any remarks?
I just wanted to say this. I know Mr. Rinker spends a good deal of time in his AP government class making sure his students understand how broad principles of government apply in the real world. What's a little disturbing is that his students took from that their best chance of winning was to attempt to bribe the judge. Which is, in reality, only a little less disturbing that apparently the students were proven correct. I have yet to have any attorney attempt to bribe me with cake, but for those attorneys who are present, it might be worth.
Judge Butts.
I've been watching these presentations over the last 20-some years, and every year the productions, the essays are more informed and are just so amazing. I mean, when I heard the 7th grade essay and thought, and you're not the champion, you're not the overall winner, but then when I heard the 10th grade essay, was it Gabriel Mineta, and then I understood exactly why. My son's in 10th grade, so I just was like, wow, this is awesome. And I love baking. So the creativity that you exhibited in your presentation, bribery issue aside, is impressive, because as a fellow baker, I put a lot of thought into the things and the composition that I do, and this is a great way to basically do two things, to show your skill, but also educate in the process. So parents, teachers, great job, as always.
Mom did not assist with that.
Oh no, I didn't expect. After her presentation, I had assumed not, that this was all very well thought out. Absolutely, but outstanding job once again to everyone involved. So thank you.
And I would like to say definitely a thank you to all the parents who obviously supported their student in some way or another to get the results that we got here today. Also, I cannot say enough to the teachers. I've been part of the Law Day Committee for many years before I was a judge, and getting student participation is one thing that we've always struggled with. And so, you know, we definitely have to give a hands down to those teachers who step forward and promote it in their class. And we tend to see every year that we get, there seems to be a couple teachers who obviously are pushing it, and we get all kinds of entries from those teachers. I am super, super impressed with the art entries this year, because the students just didn't do an art entry. They all had something along with it. I mean, they basically did an essay along with it. They were very thought out. And I can say that there were lots and lots of essays that we had to review to make the final decision, and there were a lot of very good quality essays, and so congratulations to the essay winners who won that. Christian?
Okay, well that concludes our ceremony for today. Two things I'd just like to remind everyone again, that there will be a reception in the Jurors Lounge, which is on this floor, where the cake will be served, and we will be honoring our winners. Everyone is welcome to that. Also, for the winners, if you would stick around for just a moment so that we could get a photo up front here with everyone together. This whole ceremony has been videotaped today, and it will be rebroadcast. This year it will be on the Law Association's YouTube channel. All right. Thank you all for coming, and appreciate it.